Okay, it's 9 a.m. Pacific time. We're ready to jump in. I see Argentina as well. Love it. My name is Catherine Matthijs. I am the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. We are a consulting firm focused on turning around toxic work environments. And just a little bit about me and us. I got started in the world of dealing with toxic behaviors at work thanks to my own experience. I was the director of human resources for an organization where I found myself working with someone who was engaging in some bullying behavior. And as the director of HR, I was hearing all of the problems that he was creating. I spent a lot of time taking in complaints and things like that. And then I also spent a lot of time dealing with the turnover and trying to get the president to address this behavior. And then I also personally felt bullied. So I was dealing with this as a organizational member as well as an individual. And while I worked there, I started getting my master's degree. My degree is in organizational communication, where we were focused on human communication in organizations is essentially what my master's is in. And so, of course, I was very fascinated by what I was dealing with at work and ended up doing all of my graduate research, no matter the class. I wrote a paper on the topic of workplace bullying. So I like to joke that I have a master's degree in workplace bullying. So if you want to know how to bully really well, just stay on after and I'll give you some tips. Ha ha. And fast forward all these years later, I've since written 3 books and founded Civility Partners pretty quickly out of graduate school. And what does Civility Partners do? If you haven't met us before, we essentially do 4 things. One is lots of workforce surveys. Organizations often seek us out because they're having some sort of issue. They recognize there's high turnover, that people are unhappy. And so they want to understand what's going on. We do a climate assessment, which includes a lot of different constructs. It's not only engagement or not only, inclusivity. It's a variety of things that we're looking at. We also then work with the organization to figure out what to do with that information. So we help them create actions for change and implement those actions. We, of course, do tons of training programs. And some of my slides today are directly from some of our training that we do with our clients. And then, of course, we do coaching, and that coaching is focused on abrasive leaders. So I only do executive coaching for leaders engaging in bullying or harassment. We've served a huge array of industries over the years. We've had a ton of clients, and I've had the pleasure of being cited in a lot of cool places over the years. So let's jump in. I would love to hear from you. What brings you here? In other words, are you looking for more information for yourself individually? Kind of like, how do I, as an individual, deal with this problem? Or are you looking more for kind of organizational information as somebody who might be in HR or management? So I am curious to hear, where are people at? Organizational, both. For myself, organizational, both, organizational, both. Okay. Mostly organization. Okay, so we have a pretty good mix of both. So we'll get through both then. And I love seeing familiar faces. I love all the chat. I'm the CEO working on a positive culture. And if people can't identify bullying, I can't address it. Well, that is awesome. Thank you for being here. A lot of times CEOs are the last to admit that we need to be talking about things like this. If I could focus more on organization. Okay, we'll get through both. We will do both. We have tons of slides kind of on both sides. I'm going to make it happen. Okay, real quick too, a little housekeeping. I do love the chat. I have the chat open. I'm looking right at it. So please, please, please chat with me all throughout. If you have any questions, pop those in there and I'll either address them right when you ask them or may have to wait till the end. So be active with me. I am not a webinar deliverer who wants you to stay silent until the Q&A section at the end. I love conversations. Okay, let's jump in. The top 3 reasons for the Great Resignation were pay, no opportunities for advancement, and feeling disrespected at work. The biggest predictor of the Great Resignation was toxic work culture. And the number one reason for burnout is toxic work culture. So there is a ton of research out there that really says people are no longer interested in putting up with bad behavior. People will leave the organization, especially one blessing or not blessing, depending on which side you're on, is that people, lots more remote work. So people, the job market has opened up because we no longer have to find a job right in our own backyard. And Tara, would it be easier to put questions in the Q&A? Nope, stick them in the chat. I don't have the Q&A open. I never use the Q&A. So please, stick them in the chat. And I have my eye on the chat at all times. Are managers afraid of dealing with bullying when it comes to from other cultures? Yeah, I think, certainly the intercultural plays a role in this, that some cultures are going to be more, high power distance. Other cultures are going to be low power distance, for example. So that's going to influence how we perceive behavior. So the goal is always to help in terms of inclusivity. The goal is to really get to a point where everyone in your organization feels comfortable to talk about things like that. Will you receive the slides? No, you will not receive the slides, Katie, but if you have a specific slide you'd like to get a hold of, we can certainly send that to you. We will send out the recording. Okay, so just so you get an idea, and this is a little bit of, business case, ROI, business case, if you need to make that business case to your CEO. Lots of research on what happens to people when they're at the receiving end of toxic behavior at work. So Harvard Business Review has a couple articles from Christine Porath, and she's done a ton of work at incivility. And I say just incivility because that's kind of a lower level behavior, right? It's obviously not harassment, which would be a lot more egregious. But even if I'm at the receiving end of, a mean joke, then 48% of her survey respondents intentionally decreased their work effort. 80% said that they lost work time. 63% said they spent time avoiding the offender. 78% said that their commitment to the organization declines. So allowing incivility is really causing harm to the organization. Christine Porath is her name. And yes, Deborah, you can share the recording with whomever you please. So here's the summary of 40 years of academic research. I've read thousands of research articles over the years around toxic workplace behavior, and there's just so much evidence that toxic behavior causes a whole lot of damage. It's stressful, it's distracting, we get discouraged, we can develop, stress certainly can cause us to develop heart problems. We're not eating, we're not sleeping. People aren't coming to work because they're trying to avoid the individual or the situation. It can lead to unsafe conditions. I've coached executives. One executive, he was the director of operations in a manufacturing company, and he was using safety as a bullying tactic. So, and even if someone's not doing that overtly, if I'm in construction and I'm on a roof and I'm feeling distracted because of the way I'm treated, obviously that's not safe, right? That I'm feeling distracted. So just tons and tons and tons of damage is caused when we're at the receiving end or witness toxic behavior. So let's get clear on what toxic even means. So I'd love for you to put in the chat, when you hear toxic employee or toxic behavior or toxic culture, what are you thinking of? They suck the energy out of the room. They're hurtful and harmful. They're disruptive. They're impatient. They shame, repeated, hurtful, sabotage, very negative, disrespectful. They speak in a condescending manner, angry, negative talk, aggressive attitude, negative vibes. They're a bully. They're not interested in change, gaslighting, demeaning, no integrity. They talk over you, offensive, aggressive, use of profanity. They do your best to make you feel like you're not the competent one. That's right. Deliberate action to harm a team, gaslighting, snapping, flagrant abuse of company values, resisting, not listening. Manipulative, gossiping. Racism is intense and subversive. They have power over you. Yeah. Thank you for these answers. So I like to get on the same page because toxic is a very subjective word. And they're undermining, taking credit. Yeah, gaslighting, bullying. Yep. So I like to use the word toxic to describe anything from, gossip or a consistent stream of microaggressions or uncivil actions, all the way up to harassment and bullying and some of these things you're talking about. Yes, we could go on, Colleen. We could go on, it seems, with a sad face. Yeah, there's a whole lot of behaviors that we would really all consider toxic. And sometimes I've been told, toxic isn't a word you should be, it's a big word. Don't use it for something like some kind of simple gossip or microaggressions. But I disagree with that. If the behavior is causing harm, then I would say it's toxic. Yeah. Tara says racism is astonishingly powerful force from all sides. Yep, indeed. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about people when we're talking about, I did ask you the question, toxic employee, but let's really focus on behaviors. So you'll notice that a lot of times I say things like people who bully, people who engage in toxic behavior. I'm trying not to call people names. And Laurel's got a great point. Frequency is a consideration. Yep. So normally, if somebody yells once or kind of loses their cool or, makes a bad joke one time, nobody's calling that person toxic. But if it's ongoing, then indeed we are calling it toxic because then it becomes insidious. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. So what am I talking about in this webinar? Everything you said, and I think more. Things like somebody who's chronically late. So they're just always, someone in the chat said kind of the time suck, or they're an energy sucker. Someone who's chronically late to things, that sucks out our energy, right? They're not reading our nonverbal cues. They're passive aggressive. They're constantly negative. Helpless victim. So if you can believe it, victimhood is a bullying tactic. I've certainly come across people who really pull that card of like, I'm a victim, everybody's an energy vampire. Yeah, I like that. They're, using victimhood, everybody's picking on me, woe is me. And it becomes bullying because it's so disruptive. So yes, all of this stuff. Yeah, poor me. I'm not down with victims. So there are 4 categories we can think of. One category is downers. So downers are the ones who are the complainer, the critiquer. They never come up with solution. They're always just pointing out problems and poking holes in things. They are always unhappy. They're defensive. The next category is the better thans. These are the ones who are the one-uppers, the name droppers. I just coached someone recently. One of his themes when I did the interviews with his team members was that he name dropped all the time. Someone's comment was like, I don't care if his sister's, cousin played basketball with Justin Timberlake. Passive is the pushovers, the helpless, the time suckers. That low confidence really disrupts the rest of the group. And then the aggressives, that's where the bullying would sit, the controlling, emotional, they're self-centered. So these are my kind of 4 categories of toxic behaviors. Nonverbal cues doesn't seem to be fair to people on the spectrum who need the verbal cues. Liz, thank you. That's a really good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yes. Something to talk about. So I think there's a little bit of a difference between someone where we recognize that, maybe they need the verbal cues versus that person who's just a talker and seems to be self-centered around talking too much and not letting other people speak. But yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Okay, so why do toxic people bug us so much? Well, or what do they have in common? One of the reasons they bug us so much is they leave us feeling powerless. So just going back to the nonverbal cues thing, I used to, actually that company where I worked, where individual was engaging in bullying, there was another director here, or another manager, and he was that guy who would come in your office and just sit down and start telling you all sorts of things. And you're like, you start typing and trying to, politely get him to exit the office, and he's just not picking it up. And eventually you have to say, I got to get work done. And eventually I had to talk to him and say, look, when you come in my office, I need you to recognize that I might be right in the middle of something. If you could maybe ask me, are you free? And then I can let you know, yes, I've got some time to chat with you, or no, I don't. So but that leaves you feeling powerless. You've lost control. These individuals are obviously lacking some communication skills and emotional intelligence. Moving over to one, I'm kind of out of order. They often have no idea they're seen as negative. So even with the individuals I coach, what happens is, although HR might have been telling them over time, people perceive you this way, or, hey, I'm hearing that you're, yelling. Can you please knock it off? What I find is while they recognize people see them as kind of hardcore, or that they're sort of a difficult manager, what's missing is the element of how impactful it is. So when I then do the interviews and present that to them, then I'm able to take them from, people just think I'm holding them accountable and I'm a tough person, to, oh my gosh, I didn't know I was causing so much damage. So that's a big key to the coaching. And really what all of these individuals are seeking are validation. They want to be heard. If it's that victimhood, they're looking for validation that their reality is real. If they're engaging in bullying, they're looking for validation that they're the most competent person in the room. So there's a lot of validation. So they're looking for something. And ultimately, I would say the number one reason people engage in this behavior is because they've been allowed to. Nobody's really addressed it. So what happens is managers are not taught to address things like a time sucker or somebody who constantly interrupts. We don't really hear about that in any sort of manager training. Manager training programs include how to address performance. But what about these more subtle toxic behaviors? How do you address that? So that's kind of tip number one. How do your managers address behavior that is a time suck, that's toxic, that's outside of the scope of their actual work, right? So it's not just what people do, but it's how they do it. So that's key number one. I'm going to I see some comments coming through. Hold on. Someone might be toxic to some people, but not others. They tend to oppress mostly those they see as a threat. 100%. That's exactly right. So what they're doing is, so people who engage in bullying behavior, I can say for sure, they know exactly who to, entertain and be charming with. And then the people who they feel threaten their competence, their ability to look competent, that is the people they go after. Absolutely. Our bully does her bullying in front of our guests. Well, it sounds like that's a great time to give her some disciplinary action. What about people that have no self-reflection? They don't see they're doing something wrong, even when it's pointed out. So Morgan, that's a great question. And that is where, I can only speak for my coaching that I do. That's the thing, is that HR, that's what I always see. HR has been talking to this person for a while about their behavior, and they're justifying and denying it. They're saying things like, they're just being sensitive. I'm just holding them accountable. They have some sort of reason or excuse, or they're saying, no, I don't. Don't you want to hear my side? And so that's super common. The answer to that is to do the 360. So when I do a 360, it's an interview. I'm not using any sort of tool. And I just ask information about how this person is perceived. And then I'm able to really hold up a very clear mirror that this is in fact what people think about you. If you don't have the resources to do something like that, Morgan, I would recommend shifting the way you have the conversation a little bit. So, and we'll talk about this in more detail later, but to say something like, people perceive that you're abrasive And I'm not going to engage in a fact battle with you. I don't know if you were abrasive yesterday in that meeting because I wasn't in the meeting, but I can tell you that 3 people perceived your behavior as abrasive, and the perception is what needs to change. And so shifting it a little bit can help. We have the employee who fits the passive category. They think every critique or criticism or comment on their work is a personal attack. Yes, but they've made overtures to it being race-based when it's not. How do you handle that level of toxicity? Because when employees feel like they walk on eggshells when trying to give a critique or discuss performance. Caitlin, that's a great question. And I do see this sometimes and have coached individuals in this scenario where sometimes the theme that comes out when I'm doing the interviews is that they're essentially weaponizing race. So that, yeah, every time something's pointed out, they say things like, well, you're just saying that because of my race. And so that also, you have to look at how that violates your core values. So if one of your core values, for example, is collaboration or teamwork, somewhere along those lines, then, or even integrity, then that's the conversation you have, is that this is a work environment where we're all giving each other feedback. Everybody gets feedback all the time. The difference with you is that when we give you feedback, you're not taking it in and we're trying to help you. The feedback is coming from a place of wanting you to be successful. And, you can choose to look at it through race, but these are performance-based things that we need you to address. And so just don't go down that route. These are performance problems and we're entitled to address them as your employer. And then just like anybody else, you document, that lack of performance over time. And ultimately, maybe you go through discipline up to termination. Maybe you put them on a performance improvement plan. So I know race is scary when people say that, but you have to be able to sort of overcome that and say, well, look, I know I am confident this is not about race. I'm confident that this is really about your performance, and act accordingly. Let's see. Okay. Yep. So I see that again. A bully is Black. The person they're bullying is a Black woman. I'm white, and HR is white. They're wary of lawsuits. Of course they are, but we can't let people who have toxic behavior hold us hostage with that feeling of threatening a lawsuit, Okay. Yes, Laura, I think us white folks need to make sure we're not coming from a place of internalized white supremacy. Yes, and let's talk about that for a second. There's lots of biases outside of race, right? Let's say someone really annoys the crap out of me and they're white. It's the same conversation. When I call them out on their performance, is it because they just annoy the crap out of me and I can't stand being around them? Or is it really that their performance, is suffering? So no matter what, we have to pull back and say, is this really about performance or not? Did that person hurt me at some point in the past? Maybe they embarrassed me in front of the leaders. Am I going after them because of that? So yes, race is part of the conversation. I'm absolutely not discounting that, but there are 400 biases that could play a role in any of this conversation. It's not, yes, race is tricky and it's hard and white privilege, and there's all sorts of things that go into that, but just keep in mind that there's a variety of biases that we have, and as long as you're documenting things and making sure that you're holding people accountable consistently, all people are being held accountable, then that's the answer. So I appreciate this conversation so much. Yeah, we've got biases. Okay, I find it offensive, and we're all okay. I don't think this conversation's getting good, or not good, but I appreciate the comfort level that people have here on this chat. Most of us white people feel like we're not white supremacists. I find that offensive that we're lumped into it. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on because, and maybe we could have a whole nother chat about this. It sounds like my marketing team needs to put together a webinar around things like race and gender and kind of the intersectionality of toxic behavior and race and gender. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The highest predictor of engaging in toxic behavior is ambiguity in roles or responsibilities. So the Ståle Einarsson, he is kind of one of the beginning researchers in the world of workplace bullying and toxic behaviors. And so he has published hundreds of research articles and, of course, read thousands of research articles. He's done several meta-analysis of different other research and surveys, and this is what the conclusion he's come to. So the highest predictor of engaging in toxic behavior is ambiguity. So that means that you have to be really clear about roles and responsibilities. Okay, I see some comments coming through here. Okay, here, thank you, Caroline, for moving on. Yeah, so I see some comments still about race and things. I think I'm certainly not trying to quiet that conversation. I promise you, we will do another webinar on kind of, again, the intersectionality of toxic behaviors and bias and race and gender. And I'm going to move forward on our topic. So if we could keep focused on the topic at hand, that would be awesome. Okay, so toxic behavior is a social thing. So here's the deal. You got the toxic person and you have the not toxic person or the target. Targets have counselors, right? So when I worked in the organization where I spent a lot of time in another director's office. And by the end of my time there, I was literally spending like half my day in another director's office. And then the toxic person also has counselors. So the toxic person probably has friends at work also. And the toxic person is talking to their friends. Oh my gosh, Catherine is so annoying. Don't you find her annoying? You know, blah, 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 blah. So you've got both sides are kind of engaging in venting with the people around them. What I also find is that toxic people often have lots of advocates and allies. So in bullying, for example, the narrative in those sales calls for coaching is that the CEO is the advocate and ally for the person who's bullying, because that person is such a high performer because they're so focused on competence. And so that is unfortunate. And the CEO obviously doesn't see themselves as an ally for toxic behavior, but that's ultimately what's happening. And then you've got all sorts of people who are reinforcing the behavior. So these are people who are aware of bad behavior, but they're not stepping in. And what we need to be doing is focusing on moving those people into being advocates and allies. So what I'd say is that all of us on this webinar are here because we want to understand how to address toxic behavior and toxic cultures. This slide is in many of our training programs that we do with our clients. And I can tell you this slide often has a real aha moment for everyone in the room, where the employees recognize that if they choose not to step in, that makes them a reinforcer. And of course, I get why they're not stepping in. They're afraid of retaliation. I don't blame them for not stepping in, but just helping people recognize that if you are aware of toxic behavior and you choose to stay out of it, then that actually makes you a reinforcer. Your silence is very loud. So we've got to get everybody on the side of advocates and allies. So let's talk about some individual tips, and then we'll move to, let's see, we're still cleaning up the toxic aftermath. She would talk negatively about the leadership team and employees, and now her in-group is continuing the toxic behavior. Yeah, Katie, so that's what happens. Clicks are a bad thing. We got to work on addressing that. Ellen asks, do you offer active bystander training? 100%. It's one of our most common requested training program. So we call it From Bystander to Upstander. And that training is all about kind of why we don't step in, unpacking all of the things we're afraid of when it comes to stepping in, and then really provides a lot of very clear tips and tricks for what to do when you see some negative behavior. And short summary of the training, it does, while some of the tips are certainly here are things you could say, also helping people recognize that it doesn't have to be that you step in and like, don't do that. You know, I'm talking to you about it. It could just be something as simple as walking into the room to make your presence known. So really giving everyone a very clear, like there's a lot you could do in being an upstander. Okay, so ultimately my 3 tips are going to fall into these 3 sections. Recognize that this person generally has no idea that they're causing so much damage. Nobody's waking up excited to cause damage to their coworkers or the organization. They have a narrative, and you know, if it's a victimhood narrative, then you know they're not waking up like I'm excited to cause damage. They're feeling damaged. If there's someone engaging in bullying, they're just trying to get results. They have no idea that the way they're going about that is causing damage. So just recognizing that part of the deal here is they don't understand the damage or the impact. So secondly, you have to decide that you're not going to tolerate that behavior. And thirdly, you have to hold true to your boundaries. So let me give you a couple tips around that. So again, recognizing that we're talking about behavior, not a person. So define the problem as a person and you're in trouble because you can't change people. Define it as a behavior and you can do something. So really recognizing that this is a behavior that I have a problem with, not the person so much. So my first tip for you is to look inward and really understand, why am I annoyed by this person? What damage are they tapping into? You know, why does it rub me the wrong way? And so just using my example, going back to the gentleman that would come in my office and just sit down and he'd like lean back with his coffee and just start talking to me about stuff when I'm in the middle of something. That annoyed me because I'm a super type A, you know, I'm if you've done DISC, I'm a high D. I need quick information. I like to get work done. I'm like, let's go. And I have had to learn to develop a lot of patience around what I might consider small talk, because it's not in my nature. Like if I call a client, I'm not usually like, how are you? Let's talk about the weekend. You know, it's let's get down to business, and I have to catch myself. So the first step, it really is to look inward. What is this triggering for me? Is this person similar to a friend I had in the past who hurt me? You know, how do they hold up a mirror for me? So, you know, again, looking inward, thinking about why this person bothers you so much. That's the first step. Okay, so I actually made a case study or a scenario out of this individual. We called him Alan. We're not going to go through this, but this is just an example of the types of things we do internally with clients when we're training, is to get people to really think through, you know, these types of conversations. Katie says, I look inward. I say look inward so much. Well, there you go. Marianne, the recording will be available to you. Thanks for joining us. No, Alan's not a bully. And I'm not talking about Alan as a bully. Alan is, though, you know, Alan has the ability to take my energy. He's a time suck. So, you know, he's a little self-centered in that he just comes in and sits down and starts telling me all of his crazy stories, and they were crazy. He had some fun stories. I'm not gonna deny that, but I wasn't always ready to listen. So you also, you know, certainly consider your level of emotional intelligence as well. So of course, emotional intelligence is around self-awareness of your own emotions and management of your own emotions, and then awareness of other people's emotions and managing other people's emotions or the relationship that you have with them. And so part of this, you know, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more able you are to not let toxic behaviors kind of rub you the wrong way. So there is tons of resources out there for emotional intelligence. I certainly recommend. There's lots of free quizzes out there that you could take. Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is a topic or a book that's gotten a lot of attention. So just thinking, it might be a good practice for all of us to do this every now and again and just kind of get in tune with where we're at with our own emotional intelligence. So, considering if you're good at managing yourself, or self-monitoring, as we call it in my world, that you have the ability to adapt, you have the ability to learn, you have the ability to kind of figure out how can I be in this conversation? Let's see. I don't think it's always true that they have no idea they're causing harm. Some people don't, but some absolutely know what they're doing, and that's the point. Some people actually revel in causing others pain. That's interesting. Let's talk about that. I would say, so I'm gonna just play or push back on you a little bit. I've been coaching people who engage in bullying for 13, 12 years. And I've coached a lot of people. And what I was saying earlier, they know that people are frustrated by them. They know that people see them as maybe a hard manager. And their answer to that is, I'm just holding them accountable. I'm just, trying to get work done. I'm just trying to get results. And so they have a level of understanding. They're not completely blind to it. But when I do that interview, I interview 15 people, and then I move all my interview notes into themes, and then I give those themes to the person. We literally read through them one by one. The surprise of how damaging they are is always there. And I would say there's only been 3 or 4 people that I've thought to myself, I think this person is a sociopath, because that's kind of what you're describing. If someone revels in other people's pain, that's a psychological, situation there. Most people they're not fully aware. I like that too, Caroline. They might be causing pain as payback, but again, they're not waking up like, I'm going to cause pain and I'm going to enjoy it. They are unaware of the way they're perceived. So I agree. Sometimes there are people who know, but most of the time, at least I've found in coaching people who bully, that it's not. And I know it feels that way when you're at the receiving end, 100%. Okay. Tip number 2 or 3, rise above. You just have to recognize that their behavior is irrational. They're doing what's called crazy making, and to attempt to engage in that crazy making with them or get them to stop unless you go in there with a plan and a strategy. Just smile and wave. You're not going to be able to productively talk to them. So just don't allow yourself to get sucked in emotionally. And so one tip for that is, you've probably seen this before, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, which I love this. And I do this sometimes just if somebody's frustrating you, just to kind of take a step back, close your eyes, plant your feet on the floor, feel your desk, or hang on to your cold water bottle, and listen to the sounds in your office or out the window, and just kind of get back in tune with the earth a little bit and just back inside your body. It can be super relaxing. So any sort of stress management technique is going to be helpful in these scenarios. Also establishing boundaries. So setting boundaries and then sticking to them is going to be super important. So I'm going to give you some tips. So for example, if someone doesn't listen, maybe they always interrupt. Maybe you say something like, would it bother you to know that I feel like you're not listening? This is a great question. Would it bother you to know? Because it's going to cause them to take a step back. They're not going to say, no, it doesn't bother me. They're going to say, really? Or if someone's gossiping, do you mind if I ask why you're sharing this story? Or to someone who's exaggerating, when you say always late, do you mean sometimes? So yes, these are for you as individuals. I'm definitely going to get to organizational stuff in a minute. And some other things, if somebody in an email, for example, somebody sends nasty emails often, that's kind of their thing. They're firing off ugly emails a lot. You might stop responding to those nasty emails or the content. And instead, what you might say is, I appreciate your thoughts. I can't respond to the content of your email written in this tone and with this abrasiveness. Send me an updated version, or we can speak in person. And just constantly respond that way. I don't respond to emails written like this. I don't respond to emails written like this, and just continue to push back. If somebody's sending you late night texts all the time because they're a workaholic, you can just let them know. Once I get home, I consider myself off the clock because I'm with my family. So if you text me after 6 p.m., you're welcome to. Just know I'm not going to respond until 8 a.m. So just setting a boundary and the key is to stick to it. Just like with kids, consistency is key. Staying aware of their emotions, so sometimes you have to find ways to manage their emotions. So for example, individuals who bully, which is obviously my expertise in terms of all the types of toxic behavior that's out there. If you know that the individual is going to explode when given certain information, maybe that's the information you send in an email. So there is a level of tiptoeing, and I hate to say that, but sometimes, you have to do what you need to do to protect yourself. So, and I do see that a lot. That's one of the things when I interview and present the feedback. Often one of the themes is we have special processes to avoid that person. And that really hurts them. They don't like hearing that. Okay. Last tip for you is to we got 2 tips. Keep hold of your own emotions. So certainly you're being aware of them. Again, being aware of your own too. If it's triggering for you to interact with somebody, then, back away from them, interact with them as little as you possibly can. So psychological self-defense. That's right, Colleen. You've got to find a way to keep hold of your emotions. And going back to my slide earlier, recognizing that people who engage in toxic behavior cause us as individuals a lot of damage. So sometimes I get phone calls from people who find me online with the bullying work that I do, and they really want advice around how to solve this problem. And I can just feel through the phone how damaged they are, and sometimes my advice is just, you got to take care of yourself and get yourself some therapy and get out. I'm a huge fan of therapy. And then lastly, squashing that negative self-talk. So if they're coming after you and calling you incompetent, recognizing that's an issue with them, not an issue with me. And it is what it is. Let's see. I tell someone, I understand that you're upset, but yelling at me isn't going to help. Yep. Move on, get away from it. Okay. So those are my tips for individuals. Keep them coming in the chat. If you have others that you want to share that work for you, I appreciate that. So as an organization, you have the ability to hold individuals accountable for their behavior. You may not have gossip in your corporate policy handbook as inappropriate behavior, right? And certainly it's not illegal to gossip. However, you have the ability to hold people accountable. I'm going to compare this to someone who is late all of the time, because I find that there seems to be a disconnect for organizations around, well, if it's not harassment, can I really address it? And the answer is yes, because people all around the world are disciplined for and even fired for being late to work consistently. I myself have fired people as internal HR for being late consistently. It's not illegal to be late, but it's disruptive to the organization, and the organization has the right to hold people accountable to being on time. It's the same conversation. If somebody is engaging in anything from microaggressions to gossip to bullying or anything in between, any of these behaviors we've been talking about, you have the right to hold them accountable. So please keep that in mind. You absolutely have the right. Someone says, well, how do I do that? So I'm going to tell you. Okay, so the first thing to do is to lean on your core values. So maybe, again, maybe these behaviors are not illegal, maybe they're not addressed in your corporate policy, but you do have core values for a reason. The point of core values is to hold people accountable to a certain kind of behavior. So this is a great conversation to have with your team, with your leadership team. When we look at our core values, do we see people really exhibiting these behaviors, and what does it look like? And when they're not being demonstrated, what does that look like? So this is another slide from our training programs, where, for example, in the upstander training, we're asking people, how could you influence a toxic situation as an individual contributor? But then also recognizing as if you're on the employer side and have management duties, or leadership duties, that you have the ability to really figure out what does this core value mean, and how can we hold people accountable to it. So a big key to that is making your core values into core competencies. So if one of your core values, well, I'll use ours, for example. One of our core values is learn a lot. And then we have our little description. It means you have to take mistakes with stride, that we learn from mistakes. You have to be interested in learning like a champ, because we're all learning lots of things all day, every day at my organization. So we can really, if someone says, oh, I didn't have time to learn that or research that, or they keep saying, I don't know how to do that, it means they're not focused on learning, and then we can hold them accountable to it. So turning your core values into competencies is super important, and we can help you do that. We do that a lot with our clients. So let's talk about coaching. So this speaks to what I was saying earlier about how to talk to somebody who defends themselves. So your first step is to make them see. And again, I know if you're in HR, it's really easy to get focused on the facts, right? Someone uses the phrase hostile work environment and the sirens go off, and you've got to be an investigator like you're on an episode of Law and Order. And it's all about trying to figure out if illegal behavior happened or not. Take a step back from that. Yes, you might have to do that. I'm not saying don't do that, but take a step back and think about the perceptions of people. So that's where Civility Partners operates. So you say, we've had several complaints about perceptions of interactions with you. Those perceptions are not acceptable. And then, of course, the person says, nah, that's not what happened. They deserved it. You haven't heard my side. They're just being sensitive. What am I supposed to do when they don't perform? And so they're going to justify and or deny. And what you're going to say in return is, I don't know what happened. I am not going to engage in a fact battle with you. The one fact I have is that several people perceive that you're X, Y, and Z, insert behavior. And that's the fact that I'm focused on. That fact has to change. And then you can enroll them into this idea that they need some help with their behavior. How's this landing for people? Does this sound good? Does this sound useful? I swear this script is going to change your life. Okay. Yep. So get out of the fact battles. Focus on perceptions. And that's what I focus on. So when I'm coaching these individuals, they can tell me that's not what happened all they want. And I can say, well, I don't know. I'm a coach. I don't work there. But I can tell you I have 20-page report that says people perceive you a certain way. Do you care about that? And do you want to make change? And of course they do. Okay, so one comment I think I see a couple times here is around a lot of times people say, well, I need specific examples. I can't help you, or I can't change it if you can't tell me exactly when I did this thing that you're saying I do. And the answer to that is, as a coach, my answer is, well, we have to get good at figuring out when we're doing these things and being perceived that way. So I'm not going to go and find examples for you. You've got to come up with your own examples. And then through coaching, I can keep asking questions like, well, can you think of it? Here, one of your themes is you embarrass people in public. Can you think of a time you've ever done that? No, I don't do that. Okay, well, when you're in meetings, how does that look? Do you participate actively in meetings? Yeah, I do. I have a lot to say. Okay. What's your reaction if someone says something that you don't agree with? How do you act? I don't know. I say, I might comment back. It's a meeting. That's what we're supposed to do. Okay. Well, and you just kind of take them down this path. So it's not your job to provide them with a bunch of examples. If they're really interested in change, they'll find their own examples and you can help them get there. So don't let them kind of trick you into, I can't change it without the examples. And again, this is what I do for a living. Happy to help. So there are a lot of assumptions around these individuals, right? That they're fully aware of their behavior, that they're focused on harming, they can't change, they're going to quit if they're held accountable, and there's something wrong with them. The reality is, again, they're fully unaware of the impact. They might know that people don't like working with them. They're unaware of the impact they're having and the magnitude of it. They're focused on getting the job done. They can change. I can promise you that. I've seen it happen many times. And they want to change. Again, unless they're a psychopath, they're interested in change. Nobody enjoys knowing that everybody thinks they're horrible to work with, unless they're a psychopath. In which case you might want to work on having them removed from the organization. And reality is, I hate to say it, but there's something wrong with the organization. If the organization has allowed this behavior to unfold over time and it hasn't been addressed, that's an issue. Carolyn, well, crap, I think this person is a psychopath. Well, dang it. So what you do, Carolyn, just like you would do with any other performance problem, you hold them accountable, hold them accountable, hold them accountable, put them on a PIP, hold them accountable, and then you let them go. That's what you got to do. That's my HR hat. But you've got to hold them accountable. And the reason they're acting this way is because they've been allowed to, right? How do they not understand their behavior when they've already received complaints? Great question. Again, the problem is that they're getting complaints, and generally, because I know HR, we get really focused on the facts and they disagree with the facts. Have you ever had an argument with your spouse and the next morning you talk about it and you're like, I didn't say that. That's not what happened. I mean, I remember telling my ex-husband sometimes, like, were we even in the same argument? I don't even know what you're talking about, right? So how can I change if I disagree with the narrative that my spouse shared, right? So that's what I'm focused on. That's why you got to get away from the facts, because they can argue and deny all day long. The narrative is different in their head. They remember it differently. But if you can talk about the perception, then that's going to be a super key. And also, it's not easy we're acting like, well, if I tell them people think that they're that they should be like, oh my gosh, I got to change. Nobody responds that way. We're all going to defend ourselves, right? So you got to go about it in a way that helps them understand. And that's the problem, is unless you've got, these kinds of tips, it can be really hard for them to understand. So just because you told them, it doesn't mean they took it in. And that's the thing. Just like, I'm going to use the spouse example. Just like if you tell your spouse, I feel like you don't really ever do the dishes, I really need your help with the dishes, and they say, I do the dishes sometimes. Just, do you hold your spouse accountable to that same thing, right? That you're like, well, I told you, and now you're just doing it to tick me off. And you're every morning you wake up thinking, I'm not going to do the dishes because you asked me to, so we got to give them some slack. So when I do coaching, I'm focused on what the negative perceptions are. Yeah, the dishes argument is a losing battle. Exactly. I know. What are the negative perceptions? I answer that question through the interviews. And then through coaching, we figure out what's causing these perceptions and what are the perceptions we can engage in or what strategies are there. So this is a real example from one of my clients. It's like, okay, what do we observe? Let's look at your feedback. Well, this was the guy who name dropped all the time. And, one of his things was in Monday morning meetings, I try to get people to talk about what they did over the weekend, and nobody says anything. So I'm like, well, why do you think they don't say anything? And he says, well, they're probably ashamed. They can't keep up with me. You know, I played basketball with Justin Timberlake once. And so that was really easy for me to say, well, one of your themes is that you're egotistical. So do you think that plays into that? And he was kind of like, I get you. And then I said, if for you, the Monday morning meeting, when you ask that question, is a time to one up each other, of course, people aren't going to respond, right? So do you really care, or are you just looking to one up them? So those are the kinds of coaching conversations that I have. Just to give you an example, another client of mine, Mercedes, these were some of her themes. And of course, there's a theme, and there's often half a page, if not a page, of bullet points that are people's comments all moved into those themes. And so these were some of her themes. And after 5 months of coaching with me, we re-interview everyone, and it was all good. People had seen a real change in her. So that was really cool. So here's what I'm going to say. When you're looking at change, you've got to focus on behaviors of everyone. You've got to focus on the organizational problems that allowed that behavior to occur. And then, of course, leadership has to be there, has to be on board with this. So these are the types of things that we're focusing on when we're helping organizations change. And again, it's so easy to be like, well, they're a toxic person. You know, it's their fault. They're a horrible person. Of course, you know, we've had lots of conversations. Of course, they mean it. They've already been told not to do it, and they keep doing it. But you have to really recognize they're doing it inside of your organization. It's happening in your context. So what's happening in the context that they feel they have permission to act that way? So we're coming to a close here. So I wanted to offer up a couple things. If you if you email me at info@civilitypartners.com, my amazing team will send you a couple things. One is this competency matrix. So if you take your core values, and for example, inclusiveness or inclusivity is one of the core values in this example in our handout, to be able to define those words, what they mean exactly, because inclusivity is fairly subjective, and then you can actually measure people on good, positive, inclusive behavior. So send us an email, and my wonderful team will send that to you. What else do I need to offer up? Oh, you'll also get 16 strategies for stepping in. So I'm going to give you basically 16 scripts, 16 options of things you could say in the moment for any of these types of behaviors we've been talking about. And lastly, if you're here for your credit for SHRM, for your continuing education, there is your ID or your activity ID. And thank you for your comments about how this has been helpful and amazing. Really appreciate that feedback. I'm happy to also answer more questions, or if you have a specific situation you want to talk about, email info@ and set up a time with me. My team would be more than happy to set up a 15-minute kind of quick chat. Happy to brainstorm. I obviously love this stuff, and happy to continue to talk about it offline. Let's see, can you talk about the role or impact of power and power dynamics? Great question. Yeah, so most of the time people engaging in bullying behavior are the people who have power, right? They're the executive VP, and they have the CEO's ear. And so certainly that's one of the reasons people don't speak up. They're afraid of, you know, this individual because they're higher than them and they have the CEO's ear. We could also look at it outside of hierarchy. We could look at things like race or gender. If I'm the only woman who works in an office or works somewhere, you know, there's power dynamics at play there. Or race, if I'm the underrepresented in any way, shape, or form, there's power dynamics there. So that certainly plays a role in this. However, I would say that even if the person engaging in the toxic behavior is above you on the hierarchy in the organization, that you still have the right to set boundaries and protect yourself. And it's not insubordinate to ask somebody to respect you and your boundaries. So that's my response to that. Let me put my email back up. If you did not get that activity ID written down, just again, email us and my team they're on it. They will make sure that you get it. And thank you so much. I appreciate all of the feedback. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. We got lots of messages coming in. Let's see. Thank you all. Everyone have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.